Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Two Average Brown Bros podcast. I'm your host, Prashank,
And I'm your host, Andres.
and today is July 12th, 2021. Andres, what's happening, man?
Not much, it's just another hot weekend over here at the prairies. So there's that. But other than that, been a pretty chill week. I cannot really complain. How are you doing?
Not bad. It's been a busy, hectic week, right? We're both, I think, slowly starting to pack. I mean, I know you're deep into packing and moving, but for me, I'll be moving in a month or so too. So, I need to start somewhat packing. Took out my suitcase just to get my winter clothes, all packed up, but it didn't happen. So, I mean, some of it's already packed and, with you, but there's lots of clothes here, living here in Canada, living here for 12 years now. I have accumulated quite a lot of clothes and even like souvenirs. I think that's the biggest thing for me. I have lots of souvenirs from different parts of the world, and most of them, as you know, I like to collect shot glasses.
Yes.
And I have well over 30, 40 now, and I think packing that's going to be hard because I don't want to break them, so I have to do it in a way where, I wrap my clothes around some, or put it in a specific box. Like I'll probably have to buy like a box, or and then even like beds and stuff. I don't want to take my bed, but if I have to, it probably will. But yeah, I guess that's just life.
I bet. I know packing is just so hard, and then figuring out what to get rid of and what not to get rid of. It's a lot.
Exactly. How's your move coming up, Andres?
It's going well. I'm getting into the nitty gritty of it. So before I was just like doing like packing of things like I didn't need anymore at the time. So like books and my winter clothing and all of that. But now I'm starting to move now into the deep closet, getting rid of some stuff. But yeah, I'm not ready to pack the kitchen. That's gonna be the biggest nightmare.
Right on. So what'd you learn this week, Andres?
What did I learn this week? Oh, this week, because I am going back to the student life. I learned a lot about student loans and the process about to go about them. And I'm just like, oh, another logistical nightmare. Oh my God, they don't make it easy for anything. So I learned a lot about student loans and how they work, lines of credit, and kind of like figuring out what's the best combination for myself, but learned a lot about that. But yeah, definitely something I did like that came out of it is that it's not an easy process, and I honestly don't understand why they make it so hard, especially if they're trying to help students out so that they can go and study. They make it very hard for anyone to kind of like to go through it. How about you, buddy? What did you learn this week?
Yeah, before I move on to that, yeah, loans is tough, right? Like student loans, I mean, I took student loans to go to university and stuff, and I'm finally paying it off. I don't have that much left, but it is a process and a half, and I think it's not bad. Like it's part of I guess everyone has different opinions on loans, but like if most people like us who we want to further educate ourselves and want to go to school and we're not as privileged, loans are the way to do it as long as you can pay them off, and we will be able to pay them off because we'll be working.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just like a lot of that. So figuring it out, hopefully it all gets sorted out sooner rather than later. But I'm glad I got on top of it right now so that everything all that of that sort can be sorted out here and then don't have to worry once I'm over in Montreal. But yeah, that's what I learned. How about you, man?
Yeah, so this week, like you, I'm also moving out of Saskatchewan, and I'm just trying to find different things to do in and around Saskatchewan. So last week for Canada Day, like I mentioned, I went to Banff, Alberta, which was really nice. But then this weekend, I want to do, and this week and the coming weeks, I want to do more things in Saskatchewan itself. So I was looking at like different things to do, and so I found out the highest point in Saskatchewan is actually in Cypress Hills, and it's in a random farmer's field, but the highest point is 1,392 meters, which, obviously isn't too much.
Yeah.
Compared to like some of the other places that, you and I have both been to, whether it's Banff or like in other places, especially in Nepal, like some of the low laying hills are started around 1,400, 1,500 meters.
Hmm.
So it's pretty interesting, Saskatchewan, we say it's flat, and, at times you can see it's not very flat because you see all those gorgeous hills and, but you don't see mountains. But yeah, so like Cypress Hills, the highest point in Saskatchewan is 1392. But if you don't, cross the border to Alberta, the highest point in Cypress Hills in Alberta is 1466. So
That's
even, Cyprus as a whole, Saskatchewan's shorter, I guess, than Alberta.
that's interesting to know.
And then there's this place called Jones Peak near East End. So East End, if you don't know, it's actually in the west side of Saskatchewan by the Alberta border. There's a place called Jones Peak where you can go to the top and literally see for some miles out into the valley because it's one of the nicer points in that area. I think that's what I'll be going just to explore the area because Saskatchewan, I feel like I've explored a lot of it. Like I, mentioned a couple of episodes ago, I haven't gone to the north Saskatchewan, but like southern Saskatchewan, I've gone to a lot of places, whether it's Big Muddy in Castle Butte or Assiniboia, Shaunavon area, or I've pretty much gone to all the border crossings into the U.S.
Hmm.
Because with my job we had to inspect culverts in those areas, so literally all the border crossings from Saskatchewan into the U.S., even the closed ones I've like driven by. So this is Jones Peak is a place I haven't been yet. I have been to the East End area, but I haven't been to Jones Peak. So that's what I'm looking forward to, and that's what I learned this week.
Oh, that's pretty awesome, man. Making your way around good old Saskatchewan.
Exactly. So that's a perfect segue to, topic for this week, and it's politics. I know it's a little, controversial, not controversial because I mean, it's our opinion. We are free to, hold our beliefs and stuff. But I only say that because we are recording this early in the morning. So I don't know if your brain is up for it. I know my brain, when it's early in the morning, I mean, these days, granted, I wake up around 7, 8, so it's not too bad.
It's still, it's early in the morning, but I think, yeah, I think we've been up for a bit that our brains can kind of like make it work.
Exactly. So that's where I want to start. I know, like, politics is one of the biggest things in our, society. Like, it engulfs everything. And there's so many controversy around politics, whether it's, the voting age or, gun rights, abortion rights, all that. But also, even like, if talking about politics is taboo, sometimes, people feel like it's taboo that two things that you should never talk about is politics and religion because people get into arguments. But I think, which is true, like I have gone to arguments with people about politics, but I think if you do it in a friendly manner, informed manner, I think it can be very beneficial because a lot of people that talk about politics, not always they know what they're talking about. And that's not the point of today's episode. We're not doing like an, educational, informed conversation. It's more of our own opinions, our beliefs, what we think is, you know, what we think is right. Like obviously people will most certainly disagree, but that's okay because this is our podcast and it's our opinions.
Exactly. And you can't take them or you cannot. It's up to you. But once again, like you mentioned, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. As long as it's not being offensive and it's being said in a proper way, I think it's all right to have those conversations.
Exactly. So Andres, where do you fit on a political spectrum?
Where do I fit in the political spectrum? I've done a couple of those tests of like your political compass, and then I'm pretty sure there was one either from one of the big Ivy League schools that you can take to see where you land. Uh, I usually land somewhere between a moderate and a progressive. That's usually where my stance is um, when it comes to politics, and I guess it also depends on which part of politics we're talking about. Uh, if we're talking about economics and talking about more of the financial world, I think I tend to lean more towards being a moderate, kind of like towards a centrist. But if we talk about social programs, welfare system, uh, helping marginalized like communities, populations, access to different things. That's where I land a little bit more in, like human rights and all of that. I land more on the progressive side, which yeah, it really so it's kind of like really depends on when it comes down to it. It depends on like the platform that someone is presenting that will gear me one way or another. How about you, Rishank? Where are you in the political spectrum?
I think, I've had this conversation with so many people, and I think these days, especially, I'm pretty far left. Like, I don't want to say like extreme left, but I am more of like the, social democrat, that kind of area. I'm pretty liberal with a lot of my opinions, whether it's, universal basic income or like military spending or even abortion. Like, I know that's a hot topic these days, but like that is one of the biggest topics, abortion and like gun rights, especially. Like, I feel like gun rights, as we delve into that more, a little bit more into the episode, that's one of the biggest topics. Because like for me, I love living in the US and Canada, and we're privileged enough to like, not have civil wars here. We're privileged enough to be, not living under the poverty line or like so many other things that happens in across the world. But then with that comes with, gun violence. Although Canada isn't bad as the US, we still have lots of, gun violence that does happen in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So like, with those things, or whether it's, even like the basic things such as minimum wage, like that's a perfect example where I feel like the minimum wage should be $15-$20. I feel like education should be free. I feel like healthcare, pharmacare, dental care, they should all be free, or at least, quite like lower than what it is normally. Also, with those come taxes, right? Obviously, when you have all these free things, you're gonna have to pay more taxes. And for me personally, I think that's perfectly okay. I know, but again, with that, I think it's a little bit hard. We can delve more into that, but with taxes, I feel like corporations should be way more taxed than they are now. And I know a lot of, you know, left wing people agree with me on that. Where the I guess middle income families and even low income families, like they shouldn't be paying as much taxes because they're obviously not making as much, and like higher income people and corporations should be taxed more, but obviously that doesn't work out because of lobbying and stuff, right? Like corporations are gonna pay a whole bunch of money to their favorite politician to make sure their corporate tax and like wealthy taxes stay low.
Oh yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think that's kind of like I don't know, we both of us kind of like align a little bit for kind of like where we are at, but definitely, when we have had a conversation and everything, you're more towards the left. And then sometimes I'm just like, but let's remember we live in a capitalist world. So that's kind of like, for me, that's kind of like what pushes me more into the moderate side. It's like, yeah, I would love to all of like some of these things to happen, but I also realize kind of like where we are in kind of like the economic system that we run as a country, and like in the world. So then I like kind of like that pushes me more into the moderate side in order to like, I think it's a little bit easier to start making change there and then slowly start progressing towards more of the reforms from the left. But yeah, no, it's just like definitely there's certain things that I think we both agree on. And I mean, there's other things that I believe certain people are wrong about it. But at the end of the day, I think when it comes, I think the biggest things with politics is, I would say, the influence that the private industry can have on it, which, I mean, if the private industry wants to have that much say on politics, then they should also be kind of like putting their say, and like putting their words and things like that, and contributing to it, because as citizens and residents and anything, you pay your taxes. So in a certain way, you're paying so that the government can function, right? And then for you to, in order to decide like if you're happy or not with the government that you chose, that's when we go voting. And that's how we, you choose who you want your country to be run for, like ran by. But with corporations, some of them find multiple ways and how to kind of like evade taxes or not pay taxes. But at the end of the day, they have still a big say when they are like funding certain politicians, which I think at the end of the day, if you want things to be done and all of that, like I think everyone should be playing in a certain way. It doesn't feel like fair at times, so everyone should be playing fairly.
Yep, absolutely. And so I guess let's go back to the basics of leftist versus right philosophies. So like left wing the governments for the around the world are like, as far as communism to labor parties to democratic parties, right?
Yes.
But then in the right side you have the Republicans, conservatives, and nationalists. Liberals are usually more progressive, whereas conservatives are more traditional. The left wings, they for trade they like fair trade and they support workers, and their goal is more personal freedom, but they're focused on society. Whereas on the other side, the right wing politics, they're focused more on the individuals and they want more economic freedoms, but they support employers and they want free trade. So for the economy, the left, they like to regulate economy, businesses, and industry, so tax and spend. But then on the right wing, they like having deregulated economy, business, and industry, so don't tax and spend. So I think like these aren't like I guess these aren't more my opinions. They're just a general idea of what each of the people believe. Of course, once you look at the actual spectrum, there's so many, right? Even like this is based on like the American, whereas there's a contrast between the left and the right. In Canada, we have multiple parties, so that you have the Liberals, the Conservatives, as well as the NDP. They are a little bit more left, but they're, I feel like they're trying to capture that missing link between the left and the right.
Yes.
And, there's so many, I guess, differences, but there's also similarities, right? Like we all want good society. We all want, happy people in our society. We all want things for ourselves, for our family, for our generations to come. So I think finding a link, like finding the common ground isn't that hard. Of course, nowadays politics is so decisive. It's like a pendulum, right? Like, so we talk about US a lot because that's where we see political, the divisiveness in action. Of course, you see it in other places, but like we live in Canada, so of course we're going to focus in America and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So like, the pendulum swings one way where, 2008, 2012, America voted their first black president, first colored president.
Yes.
And then it swung completely opposite way. And they, like, I'm not afraid to say this, and they voted in a racist, like I could say a lot worse, but a racist, an annoying, idiotic president.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no,
So,
absolutely.
and then it swung back again to, electing Joe Biden in the most recent election. And that's even true with, politics. Like I can't speak to before Stephen Harper, but like Stephen Harper, obviously in a lot of ways, he was good for like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, because he is from Calgary, Alberta. So, he made his goal to help the Western forgotten provinces. But now, now that Justin Trudeau's in the, leader position of Canada, a lot of people in the West are starting to be, forgotten. They say we're the forgotten provinces again, because obviously he, like, as much as we want, the leaders to focus with all of Canada, that's just not reasonable, right? They have to cater towards their base as much as they can because they don't want to lose those surefire seats.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's when it comes to it, it's kind of like the so-called base. And like I understand politicians have their base and everything, but once again, I think everything just intertwines with each other. So, not to be offensive or anything, but when you don't have a certain level of education or exposure to the outside world in a certain way, or not keeping up to date with kind of like what's happening outside of your province, then it narrows down kind of like your perspective on things. And uh, that like it also leads to kind of like how people vote and how people choose their politician, or like their representative to like go like to the house and all of that. But at the same time, it's just like you can see that shift even when it comes to like the way people think with their politics and where their political views are aligned to. A lot of it also has to play a little bit in kind of like where you are, where you be, where how and where you were raised, and kind of like that structure around yourself. It also doesn't permit to kind of like sometimes people are just stuck with that, and like sometimes people are just like, oh, my we've been voting this party for this so many years, we're not gonna change, we're just gonna keep on voting for this person even though they don't live and read to what their platform is or what they're advocating for. At the end of the day, they're just like, oh, we voted party A for so many years that we're going to continue to vote for party A, which is also a little bit like, if you do your research, maybe voting for that party isn't the right move right now because of how the economy is playing, and it's better to vote for another person.
Yep, and I feel like that's even with me, right? Like as time has gone on, I know like as you get older, you get more conservative because you want to keep what's yours, and that I mean that's speaking generally, of course. But with me, I found myself being more left because I know like we're all born selfish. I feel because we all want what's good for ourselves. But like the more I read into stuff and the more I like look at other like societies, I feel like if you help others in need, because that's a thing a lot of people don't understand, like all these welfare stuff, and like yeah, you could cut those out, but say you're in that position one day, like say all of a sudden you wake up, you lose all your money, you're on the streets, you're going to need those same services that you're going against. Like I said, I feel like as I get older, I should be getting more conservative, but I feel like I'm becoming the opposite, where it's more liberal and more left, because I feel like if society thrives, we all thrive together, right? So
Oh yeah, and the thing is, like with things like when it comes to like going back to the welfare system and the social assistance programs and all of that, is at the end of the day, people are like, oh, but like you're giving them something and then they will latch onto it. If the programs are structured correctly, um, because that's another part, like maybe programs aren't structured the right way. So then that's where people are not really in tune with them or they just don't want them anymore. But if a social program is structured the right way, the final outcome of it is to in order to help people get out of the situation they're in order for them to, in a certain way, um, in order for them to start making their own way, in order for them to start earning their own money, to start getting their foot back in the ground and like making slow progress until like you're able to get out of that. Not saying like ever, like, sometimes it depends on level of education, circumstances, and all of that. That it may be not possible that certain people will be completely like what we will in a certain way, in like the standard of like the modern world, what thriving is, but they will be able to be doing more than surviving. And I think for like when it comes to social programs, that's the end goal, is to make sure that people are not just surviving, not just meeting the mere minimum, but they're able to kind of like have a decent life, special. And then once you're out of that, that social programs will benefit someone else. But the cost that goes into different things could go into different parts of the different institutes or different programs out there, and it will like you'll see the benefit. But the thing is, also we've been raised and we've been, I think, put in a culture in which we've been sold, when it comes to politics, we've been sold like we want immediate change, we want to see things happen in very short spans of time. So for example, when we talk about in the states, whenever the president serves for 4 years before getting into re-election. But realistically, there's elections happening every 2 years. So that's like such a short period of time that, of course, if you want to do something that can change, or like in order to make sure that things are going on the way you want them, as the way you campaign for things, you have very short periods of time, because it's like literally 2 years. But in those 2 years, you need to know kind of like how are you going to make it happen, what are your end goals, because then you're going back into campaign mode. So that's also when things get disrupted, and we've been put into like things need to happen in short periods of time, whereas there's sometimes things that might take longer to develop, or might take longer to see the actual effects of it. But that's just based on the nature of things. Yeah, we can have very short and small intervals of time where we see a lot of progress, but sometimes when you're talking about a country in general, sometimes progress might take longer, because at the end of the day you're also dealing with a generation, right? So if you're putting programs and money into, let's say, the younger generation, into their education, yeah, you can see the short term effects, like in terms of like how they're doing in school, how many people are getting enrolled in college and all of that. But you might see the investment of like putting money into the education system for, let's say, someone that right now is somewhere between K-12, You might see that way later on because they still have to make the decision of going to college. They still have to go to college. Then they have to enter the workforce. So that's a longer period of time. But when we come into what the political cycles are, not only in the States, but also here in Canada, when we look at political cycles, there might be a lot of different prime ministers. There might be a lot of different members of the House of Commons put in between when to like see actually if the programs worked or if they didn't. And I think people need to understand sometimes that it takes time to evaluate some of those things.
Yep, and I think that's one of the things you nailed it is when you said, people want change overnight, and with that often comes like a lot of times when we look at politics and we look at only the big picture things, so federal elections or like provincial elections, but a lot of times, do your day-to-day business, you should be looking at your municipal local elections. Those are the things that affect your day-to-day life a lot more than some of the federal elections, right? Like, yeah, federal elections all fun and like exciting, but some of the more like directed stances and issues, you should be talking to your local councilors, local city officials, because those affect you way more, like city taxes, property taxes, so a lot of people, and I'm guilty of this myself, like we focus on the bigger picture stuff, and which is fine, right? Like obviously those big picture topics affects us all too, but more of the day-to-day things, I think we often forget to vote in our municipal or local elections, and I think that's one thing that we should really strive to change is you should vote at every level possible. And it's like, even if you're a parent, like even those like school meeting boards, like because education is so important, your child is in school, and everything that happens in school affects you and your child's future. So like, even coming down to the nitty-gritty of school politics or work politics, when they have like issues that you need to vote on, I think we need to be more vigilant and vote on those as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you put it well when you said like like we have to sometimes think on the local side of things, because it depends. Sometimes there's a different politician that might work best for your like provincial level or municipal level compared to the federal level. And this is where I personally sometimes struggle with the Canadian system, because at the end of the day, you're voting for your representative, right? Like what is going to represent you federally in the House and over
Yep.
in Parliament. So, but the thing is, like when it comes to choosing your top leader, your top representative, the one that is going to do the business outside in the world, you really don't have a say on that because it depends on how the seats are laid out at the end of the day in Parliament. Which I see the pros on that because it will be at the end of the day, it is the party that got most seats, so it makes sense to have the leader of that party be the prime minister. But then at the same time, I would like to see maybe there's someone from a different party that I will rather have that be the prime minister compared to to who the prime minister could turn out to be just based on their work that they've done so far in the House and in Parliament, or like the platform that they're advocating for. But when voting for a representative, let's say for Saskatchewan, I think maybe either a conservative or an NDP person could be better just based on like everything, like all the different factors here in the province. So I think, like, for example, in the States or even back home in Mexico, like, yeah, we choose our own representatives. We vote for those. We vote for our own senators and all of that. But when it comes to choose our top leader, like the one that is going to take charge of the entire country, we also vote for that person. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones directing policy. They are the ones in which they choose how they want the government or where they want the government to take things. And at the end of the day, sometimes they're the ones that are able to make decisions in regards to the country. So personally, I like voting for a personal. I like voting for the top like the president or prime minister. I like voting for someone because then it also in a certain way forces them to put a platform to like the entire country rather than just focusing on their own district in a certain way. In a certain way, it makes sure that, I don't know, it's kind of like a little bit more of an accountability check just to be able to do that. So that's kind of like where I struggle a little bit with the Canadian system.
And I think, like, we're so privileged here in Canada to be able to now, now you're a PR and be getting your citizenship here soon too. You'll be voting. And like for me, I never voted before I came to Canada because first of all, I was too young. And then, when I lived in Nepal, we didn't have like a democracy. It was a monarchy when I was actually living there. It only changed to like a democratic like country afterwards. And even then,
Mm-hmm.
it's not as free and fair as here.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's going to be corruption in every various political races, but I think at the end of the day, the Western cultures, Western countries, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, U.S., Canada do a fairly good job of keeping it pretty fair and pretty fun too. They introduce politics at a young age. Obviously, some people don't like that, but I think that's a really good thing because no matter what, politics affects everyone every day.
Yes.
And there's been so many controversies with with athletes. They'll talk about politics, and then all these, like, I mean, the biggest example is LeBron James talking about politics, and then a right wing news anchor, she's like, shut up and dribble the ball, or basically she said that athletes shouldn't be concerned with politics. But I think I disagree with that so much because yes, they are athletes, and maybe some of them aren't as informed, so they spew a lot of misinformation. But at the same time, even if you're an athlete, you're still a citizen of this country, or a citizen of whatever country you live in, and you have the right to talk about politics because it still affects them. It's kind of counterintuitive to say no, you can't talk about politics because they still have the same voting rights as everyone else. So why can't they talk about politics, right? And that's how I feel just every day with people. Like, yeah, politics can be very divisive and it can get heated, but I think at the end of the day, everyone wants to look out for their family, like I said, themselves, their society. So it's not a bad topic to have at all.
Exactly, and I think you pointed it well when people in a certain way they want to censor different kinds of people in order to like um what their political view is, and even though it's controversial, I would say like they're trying to silence a specific group or groups of people that they know they have a huge influence on their demographic. And at the end of the day, I think that comes from a place of fear, and that comes from a place of like, oh, we don't like, where they want to keep power in a certain way, because that's something we've seen like across the world, like people trying to consolidate that power, and people trying in a certain way to keep the system, like a lot of it trying to keep it status quo. But then, with our generation and like generations upcoming, a lot of that is, let's be realistic, us challenging a little bit that status quo, because we do want change, we do see the world in a different way. But when it comes to, like you said, with athletes, if anything, because they do have that platform and they are role models, I feel like if they do want to speak about politics, they are in a perfect position to like express themselves as political people, because you mentioned it well. Outside, once they're done their athletic career and they go back to being a citizen and just being a person that lives their life, then there's still, politics are still going to be involved in what they're doing. And if anything, I also feel like athletes understand how much more politics work, because they don't only have to in a certain way deal with the politics when it comes to the national level, or like what we think about like politicians and representatives, but they also know how to deal with the politics within their own system, because they have to learn how to navigate some of those in order to stay sometimes within their sport. So I think they have even more intel into what politics really looks like. And so I completely agree that people should be voicing, as long as it's being done in a respectful way. I think people should be voicing some of those. And I feel like, I mean, this is just me, but if you want to engage in a political conversation, you have to be open minded. Like, you cannot go into a political conversation. Like, yeah, you can be firm on your ideals, firm on your beliefs, and firm in kind of like what you want to be done in politics, but you also have to go in with an open minded, because you never know where an idea might come from, where things could kind of like come across in order to start developing new ideas and new trends and things like that that could help the country out. But if you go in with a very close-minded attitude, then at the end of the day, those are the conversations that turn into disagreements. Those are the conversations that end up, in fights and all of that. Whereas if you go open-minded, at the end of the day, if at the end of the day you don't agree at all in a conversation you're having, both of the people or more are being respectful and are able to meet eye to eye and be like, you know what, we disagree on this, but it was good to have this conversation. Then you don't end up with disagreements. You don't end up with people being mad at each other because you have a mutual understanding of what it is like to have a conversation like that. So I think that's kind of like one of the most important things when having political conversations is like everyone will respect your point of view as long as everyone is being respectful and if you're open-minded and not just closed to your own idea.
Yep, absolutely. Open mind is good, not just for politics, but pretty much everything in life. Like if you go into anything with a closed mind, like you're never going to change, right? And even as the other person, if you're having a conversation with someone else who doesn't have an open mind, it's kind of hard to like talk to them because they're going to be stubborn. They're not going to like listen to you. They have their own, the own little world that they're living in, and they just won't change. So like either way, I think having an open mind really helps.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing in terms of politics, like you mentioned, like being like introduced in politics since very young, I think it's important because at the end of the day, when it comes to voting and in terms all of that, it is in a certain way, yeah, it's your right as a citizen, but at the same time, I feel it is an obligation as yourself as a citizen in order to go out there and choose who's going to represent yourself, who's going to represent the country and everything. I think it is both a right and a responsibility slash obligation of anyone as a citizen in order to do that. Because at the end of the day, if like I think I mentioned this before, but if you're going to complain of who is in parliament or who is the prime minister, but then I found out or people find out that you didn't vote, then for me you don't have any right to complain. Because if you didn't vote, that was your choice. You chose not to vote. So then on that one, then don't have a, like, at least in my mind, you don't have a right to complain because you can complain when you have actually taken your steps in order to make things happen or in order to make things change. But if you don't go out there and vote, then how do you expect things to change if you're not in a certain way putting out there what your preference in a certain way would be? And I grow more attached to that idea with now, living abroad, now, yeah, as a PR and everything, but still, like, personally, I cannot vote because of like the limitations of being a PR is. But still, in a certain way, I try to express my political views and what I think. In case, like, I can inform my Canadian friends, like my Canadian citizen friends, that are able to cast their votes. So in a certain way, I could have taken it for granted back home, the right of voting. Now that I'm away and I don't have that right within the country that I'm living in. But I think there's different countries around the world that actually made it mandatory to go voting. If you don't go vote, I think you get a fine, which honestly, I'm okay with that because it is a responsibility of each one of us eligible to vote, to cast our vote, to elect our government.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think voting should be mandatory. The voting age for a lot of countries is 18. I think that's a perfect age, like just exactly when you're ending high school, you're becoming an adult to sit, as most people claim. And honestly, like, I don't think that. I think a lot of kids in their university are still dumb and don't make the right decisions, but most of them do live on their own and have to make their own decisions. So, if we're, as society, we're allowing them to, buy guns when they're 18 or so many other things, I think voting should be number one on that list.
Exactly.
So we've already talked about politics as a whole for a long time, but now this is a perfect segue to the next little bit. We'll take the next little bit to talk about our personal stances on issues. Andreas, if you don't feel comfortable talking about them, feel free to just pass it on to me and I'll talk about it. I feel like with politics, I'm a pretty open person. A lot of my friends, a lot of my family know exactly where I lay, and I'm not really scared to like express them. Of course, like I don't want to like hate on others or like them to hate on me for having my opinions.
Hmm.
So, please take it as it is, and politics is politics. It's. I don't think of politics. I don't think of different stances to like hurt other people personally. It's just what I feel like personally should be the should how society should operate. Criminal justice. All right, number one is the decriminalization of drugs. What are your thoughts on that, Andres?
I think when it comes to the decriminalization of drugs, uh, I think on that it really depends on one which drugs we're talking about, to what extent are we talking about decriminalizing them. At the same time, for me, I think it does matter kind of like the regulation and kind of like the enforcement and everything that is going to come in order to be able for like drugs to be regulated. I think if there's no strong platform in terms of regulation, for me, I mean, there's certain drugs that it's okay to decriminalize and all of that, but I think there's particular kind of drugs that they do need to be heavily regulated, and kind of like the way they're distributed and everything because of the harm that they can cause to different people. And for me, like, being from Mexico, I do have there's a little bit more of that background in terms of like what drugs can do, not only to people physically and mentally, and kind of like what they can do to their lives, but also kind of like what it can do to an entire country when sometimes you're at war at different parts of the country because of drugs. So I'm not against the criminalization, but I do believe if anyone wants to go that way, there needs to be very strong policies and very step by step policy in terms of how things will be regulated, so that certain drugs are just meant to be in the hands of certain people that will need those drugs.
Yep. For me, I think there's. I think the marijuana obviously is a big one because, like, Canada, we did make it federally legal back in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And although I haven't looked at the statistics, I think marijuana is one of those drugs where you can get away with it because you can't really overdose on it. It does lead to, there's lots of, good things from marijuana, like especially the medical side where people, use it for like seizures or headaches or, cancer patients that use it to reduce their pain. And I think that's all that's amazing. And if it shows just the positive of like medical marijuana and even recreationally, I think marijuana, I see it at the same level as drinking alcohol, if not a little bit better, because drinking alcohol leads to a lot of bad decisions. I mean, weed, you could probably say the same, but a lot of like studies have shown that weed is more of a relaxant.
Mm-hmm.
So it calms you down for the most part. So like people that have mental health issues, they use it to like make them feel a lot better. But then there's the other part of drugs where it's like the hardcore drugs like cocaine, heroin, meth, all that stuff. And I think those are fine as it is because those are more hardcore and they lead to for lack of better words, more stupid shit.
Yeah.
But but one of the examples that I was reading on was Portugal. Actually, back in 2001, before in the 90s, they were having a really hard time with drugs and people abusing them, and then they completely decriminalized all their drugs. And apparently, since then, this was Time magazine from 2018, but the drug-induced death rate has plummeted to 5 times lower than the EU average, and it stands at 1/50th of the US in 2018. So maybe in the next last 3 years, it's what it's increased, decreased, I'm not sure, but that's amazing statistics. And even the rate of HIV infection has dropped from 104 to 100.2 new cases per million in 2000 to 4.2 cases per million in 2015. And then drug use has declined overall among the age groups of 15 to 24-year-old. The most at risk of initiating drug use. So there are, countries that have decriminalized it. Of course, there are other countries that go really hardcore even on marijuana. Like, we don't have to look far, like US. Even now, they're trying to change their marijuana laws, but a lot of people are still being, you know, jailed for having marijuana on them or smoking marijuana. So I feel like that should definitely change because, I mean, there has to be a line somewhere, right? I feel like you could go the Portugal route and say, oh, everything is legal, but then you could go the other way and say everything's illegal. But I feel like there has to be a balance. And I think for me, it's like marijuana is a good line because we haven't studied it for that long, but I think for the most part, we know the effects of it. And of course, the long term effects not known because it hasn't been studied for that long as much as like alcohol. But, and even like the age limit for marijuana, I feel like 21, 25 should be around it. I know people will disagree with me on that. But like the human brain is still developing, as until 25 where it starts to slow down. And I feel like that's where, kids can get in trouble because you start smoking at an early age and, it doesn't help your developing brain.
Exactly. I think there's a line, and I think as long as it's being consulted with people that actually are experts on the field, I think you can reach like you can compromise outcomes that way.
Absolutely. Gun control. All right, the second topic I have for us is gun control. I know that's a big one for us. What are your thoughts? What do you think should happen with gun licensing and background checks?
I think for me, everyone who wants to own a gun should be licensed because it's been proved, it's been shown that anyone that goes through a licensing system, one, you have to take courses in regards to like guns and all of that because it's a longer process. It prevents people to just making impulsive buys in a certain way, making impulsive decisions, because there's a big period of time that you constantly need to be presented with certain materials, presented with different rules, presented with the different laws and regulations. It can drive away those people that were not intended good in terms of like how they will use their firearms. I mean, I do not personally. I'm the kind of person that I'm like the furthest away I could be away from guns and all of that, the best. Just because haven't had my I haven't had good experiences with firearms. They actually are sometimes a little bit too triggering for myself. But with that, if someone wants a gun for hunting, or they want to go down and shoot a couple of targets, I understand that. I also understand where that comes from, depending on where you've been raised and all of that, and the like environment and culture you're regarding. But I do also feel you need to be licensed in order to handle any kind of gun. And also when it comes to firearms, I do believe in a certain way, they need to be classified in different levels to what a normal civilian, once they've been licensed, these are the only ones that you will be able in a certain way to handle. And the other ones, they're just for a very restrictive, very controlled set of people that have been approved to use them. And those groups might be might be the military and all of that. But I think there's nothing wrong with gun control. I think in this age and like in this time, it is a privilege to own one. I don't think it sounds controversial, but I do not feel at times now it is a right to have one. I think it is a privilege to own a firearm.
Yep, I'm with you on that. I think gun control is one of the most passionate ones that a lot of people follow, especially with the shootings in US, Canada. But for me personally, I think, I know a lot of like people on the right will hate me for this, but I feel like you should have the most strictest gun laws. And I know like illegal guns, you can't stop, people from illegally buying it. But as far as you can, if you're a legal vendor, there should be nothing stopping you from having, background checks or like a federal government database to track the guns. That would like I said, obviously that's not going to help, reduce the number of guns that are already out there illegally.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that would help quite a lot even going forward, because it would prevent a lot of people with, if you have like if you were a criminal in the past, I don't think you should be allowed to own a gun. You lost that privilege, like you said. It's a privilege, it's not a right. And of course, Americans will disagree with me because the right to bear arms is one of their, it's on their amendments, the Second Amendment, like we all know.
Oh God.
But I feel like preventing people with mental illnesses to purchasing guns. I think that's one of the key things to. It does help because people that have gone up and done mass shootings, some of the times people have reported them in the past for having some sort of issue, and so whether it's the police or the federal authorities that haven't followed up, and I feel like a lot of it would be prevented. Of course, not all, but a lot would be prevented if they had just had done simple background checks or having like a federal government database, some sort of database, to track gun owners, gun violence in the past. If you're using a gun to just like go hunting, okay, you're that's perfectly okay. But then with that, you don't need like a fully automatic, high capacity magazine to go hunting. Maybe that's me speaking from a perspective who's never gone hunted before, or who's never been a farmer dealing with pests in the wild. But the Second Amendment in the US was created back in the day when they had those musket that shot one round every 10-20 seconds, where you had to reload it, clean it, and then shoot, right?
Yeah.
It's not catered towards today's guns, which shoots like I honestly don't know the specific of guns, but I feel like when you see it in like YouTube videos or movies, they shoot quite a lot, and is especially prevalent with when we talked about this in the previous episodes. Is a Las Vegas shooting. That was he did a lot of damage, or the Pulse shooting. Even simple pistols. I think as long as you have a permit to carry a pistol or like a rifle, I think that's fine. But like assault style weapons, I don't think like anyone needs those, especially if you're just using them for hunting.
Yeah, no, I think and I think that is when it comes further from just a background check, when it comes to the licensing thing, because you're going to get a license for a gun that it will have a specific purpose, and that's what you can use your license for. If you want to get a different kind of a firearm that it's not encompassed within the license type that you got for the firearm, then you'll have to go again into that licensing system in order to be able to procure a firearm that's outside of the scope of your current license. Mm-hmm. And I think that is where it's gonna, like, in a certain way, stop, because licensing, even with a driver's license, how long does it take for anyone to get a driver's license, right? So it should be the same for guns. So
absolutely, and like that's the thing. Some parts, it's easier to get a gun license than an actual license. So
exactly, and I think both of them are quite dangerous. Cars and guns are dangerous objects.
Absolutely. If there's a if there's a licensing system for driving, there should be a federally regulated licensing system for guns. Economic inequality. All right, next topic I have for you is economic inequality. So, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's paid family leave or the minimum wage or universal basic income, what are your thoughts, Andres?
I think on that, for me, when it comes to minimum, when it comes to minimum wage, I think anyone who is working a full-time job, no matter of what type of full-time job it is someone putting between 35 to 40 hours a week, at least, of work. No one should be under the poverty line or close to the poverty line when you're working that amount of time. No matter what they're like, some people will be like, oh, education, this and that. It doesn't matter when it comes to you putting that amount of work. You should be able to procure for yourself and able to live. That's how I'm just gonna say when it comes to minimum income. And at the end of the day, when people talk about minimum income, and I saw like an infographic about it, like I think the last 2 weeks or something, the minimum wage, when people have that conversation, they think it's gonna just help those ones like high school students that are having their job outside of school, and it's not. When we're talking about minimum wage and the raising of that minimum wage, it's gonna be helping some of those people that are already in the middle age. When they're middle age, when they are still, they're working at like a grocery market, they're working, doing cleaning services, they're doing some of those services that in a certain way they're helping to run society. And I think when it comes to the conversation of minimum wage, I think we saw this during the pandemic. Those that are mostly on the minimum wage bracket, they were the ones making the essential services when it comes to like grocery store delivery and all of that. And that is a group that most likely is on the minimum wage group, and they still had to show up to work. They were putting their life at risk, exposing themselves to a virus that at the time, at the very beginning, we didn't know how it worked, right? Whereas the other people, some of us, we were privileged enough that we were able to seclude ourselves in our home, protect ourselves, not really expose ourselves to the outside world when all of this was happening. So I think just the pandemic proved that those working on minimum wage, it is and sorry for the lack of a better word, but it's a disgrace to be paying them that when they were sacrificing so much and they were able, in a certain way, to keep the economy running. Like some of us were able to do our work from home, but they had to show up. So when it comes to the minimum wage, no one should be living on the poverty line or just a tiny little bit above the poverty line if you're working full time in any week because you're putting the hard work into that. So that's my thought on minimum wage. When it comes to the economy and social programs, I do believe when it comes to social programs, they should be funded because at the end of the day, they do help people. Life happens, and sometimes you need to go into those programs, but they do need to be funded because there's certain type of people that they do need that kind of help, that kind of assistance. So I do believe we need to help other people because if we are helping them in a certain way, we're helping overall the entire country because we're trying to, make everyone come up and have that equity between each one of us. I think that's like the main. I lean more towards equity rather than equality, just because equity is giving to people what they in a certain way need in order to keep on moving based on their circumstances, whereas equality just puts everyone in a certain way. It gives everything to everyone at the same rate when it should be more on an equity side because you're giving based on need within those terms. And sometimes the economy, yeah, it is good to have a progressive where we're spending, where we're putting things out there. But I do agree there are times, and that is where my moderate side comes in a little bit, is like there are times in which we need to be strict. And that is just sometimes it just comes even down to house economics, home economics, right? Sometimes you're able to spend a little bit more on a certain month because you have extra income or you make a couple of savings. But then there are months in which you need to tighten up your belt a little bit more because money might be a little bit tight. There were unforeseen circumstances that you had to pay for. So the next couple of months, you have to tighten up a little bit just in order to make sure that you're on your feet, that you're able to keep on moving. And then once you're back on your feet, then you're able to spend a little bit more. So sometimes it's harder to put that into the bigger macroeconomics of a country. But, there's simple principles that we use at home or in neighborhoods or in like smaller settings that could also be applied to the bigger country picture. So there's some times that it's good to be spending and be developing things, but I do also agree that there are times in which a conservative approach is better, just based on the global economic circumstances that there are times that we're facing.
Yep. So for me on this, on this topic, I think with economic inequality, I feel like this is probably where I'm most passionate about because growing up, even now, I feel like for me personally, money, like I am privileged enough to say money, I don't really care for it. It's not because I'm rich. Like, growing up, my parents were students, so we were in the low to middle income. So it's not like I'm well off. I'm not this, super rich person who can say, "Oh, I don't care about money." But it's just like there's more to life than money, in my opinion. I know there's so much to see in things, but with that, that's the thing. I'm privileged enough to say that nowadays I've come to realize, and in the last 8-10 years, there's so many people living under poverty line and living, live literally paycheck to paycheck, day to day, homelessness. And I feel like I've become more passionate about this because everyone deserves, basic human needs, whether it's food, water, shelter, those are basic human needs, and some people don't even have that. And with minimum wage, I feel like, if you have a job, that's great. The minimum wage is amazing because employers, they could give you nothing. Minimum wage in the US actually started in 1933, where I think it was 25 cents per hour standard was set. And, if you look at the inflation since then and the trends in minimum wage, our minimum wage, whether it's US, Canada, it's been around that $10-15 mark. In some places, some states, it's even lower than $10. But if you track that against inflation, minimum wage should be easily $20-25 an hour right now on how, expensive things have gone. Like back in the day, you could get milk for like 50 cents, a dollar. Now it costs us like $6 almost for a gallon of milk.
Mm-hmm.
So with inflation, I feel like the minimum wage has really lacked, and it definitely needs to be higher. But that, like I said, that's if you have a job. What if you don't have a job? Well, that's where I feel like universal basic income works, because a lot of people that are struggling to find jobs, or that don't have the means to get to their job, if you just, it's like, how they say boosting the economy, it's like boosting the individual. I feel like if corporations can receive bailouts, millions of dollars in bailouts, why can't individuals that are struggling get that basic income? Of course there is the negative sides where people will abuse that, but a lot of people, they're not going to abuse that because they're struggling to live. If you give a person who's struggling to find work, or struggling to make their basic necessities meet, if you give them $1,000 a month, they can use that towards food, they can use that towards housing, and it goes back into the economy. It really rejuvenates the economy, in my opinion. So I feel like UBI should be one of the first things we should work on, because it does help a lot of people. And I know a lot of people are gonna, on the other side, they're gonna be like, well, what if they, instead of people working, they're just gonna stay at home and spend that $1,000? Well, I mean, like, they can, but like I said, in today's world, $1,000 a month, for a lot of people living on the poverty line, that's a lot. But for the rest of us, that's not going to do much. If you have a job already, you're not going to quit your job just to go get that UBI, right? Like, I feel like that's where the line should be drawn in regards to that. If you have a job already, you shouldn't be getting paid that additional money. It should be for people that are struggling to find work. Of course, like with a lot of things, I feel like there should be some sort of a check with the government. Like even in Canada, if you're on EI or you are on CERB, that's a great example. A lot of people that were on CERB, obviously with CERB is a little bit harder to prove, but with EI, employment insurance, so if you're laid off and you're trying to find a job, you have that monthly allowance or whatever, you have to show that you're actively seeking a job, you're actively, you're not just sitting at home and doing nothing. And if you want to, I guess you can, but like $1,000, like, you pay for rent, $500-600 for rent, and then the rest in groceries for yourself or your family, and you have nothing left. So I feel like even if you get that UBI, you're still going to strive to look for better jobs and bigger and better jobs. It's going to drive you to, get a better job. Obviously that's kind of a weird statement to see, because sometimes you can't you can't find a better job, but it's by living in your means. So if that $1,000 a month helps a family who's in, who's living way under the poverty line, it helps them find a job. If it helps, find fun, a lot of people, they can't afford to pay for like public transport or afford a car. And lo and behold, that universal basic income might just be able to help them afford that car so they can go from their home to their job. So like there's so many positives of that. Of course, the taxes for the rest of us will probably go up, but I think that's perfectly okay, because if, like, we all say we want to help the economy and stuff, like, but it's like, if we can give Air Canada millions in bailouts, why can't we give 1 million people bailouts?
Yeah, that is completely, that's a good point.
So, and like even with minimum wage, like I know Canada, looking at Canada, a lot of minimum wage across the provinces, Alberta, British Columbia is in $15. Manitoba and Saskatchewan are one of the lower ones with $11.45 for Saskatchewan. Manitoba $11.90. New Brunswick $11.75, and Nunavut, the territory, $16 an hour. So like we're all over the place, and I think it should be equal because, and that's where I think I disagree with like provincial rights and states' rights, because a lot of states want to, and a lot of provinces want to do things themselves, but things like that feel like it should be standard across the board, because you're already giving a disadvantage to people in Saskatchewan because they're making way less. Of course, I do understand the cost of living in Saskatchewan is way less than living in BC or Ontario, but at the same time, these days it doesn't feel that way when you're looking at the housing prices in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to that, I think for me where I land on that is like, yeah, it should be, there should be a federal one, like there should be a federal minimum wage that is set up across the board. Like this is what, as Canadians, this is how the minimum that everyone should be earning, because then, well, that way we know that everything, like we're gonna get most Canadians to be able to live throughout that if we put this minimum wage in. But then I think where the state comes in is like the state's being able in a certain way to be like, we understand anyone who is living, let's say, within the Vancouver Island area, their cost of living might be a little more expensive. So for us as BC, we're going to say that the minimum wage for anyone working within the Vancouver Island or the Vancouver metropolitan area is going to be this much. But at least we know that, let's say, I don't know, a number, $15 across the board of Canada. I think that will kind of like settle things, everything like to that playing field in which we know like a lot of people maybe like will be able to live. And then depending on where you're living, then you of course will not be able to go below that federal minimum wage because it has been set up federally. But then as a province, let's say Saskatchewan thinks like $15 is enough and they don't need to raise it, they will not have to. But then other provinces might be like, what, we understand our cost of living is more expensive. And that's when you look like at the stats of like if the cost of living is more expensive than what the national average is, then that's when, as a province, you should step in and be like, okay, we're raising our minimum wage because we understand our cost of living is more expensive. But then that's kind of like how I see it, is like everyone federally is mandated to have a certain one that it will allow almost everyone to be able to live, and then the provinces can have a little bit more say, because in a certain way, like we talked about, sometimes local government understands more what's going up within their local when they like within the communities and municipalities and the province themselves, like in a smaller level, so they're able to tackle more of those issues that way.
Exactly. And so at the risk of running too late, I had a whole bunch of topics planned, but I'll cut it down to two more topics. Of course, we can have political talk in future episodes, because I feel like we're both passionate about politics, that we could literally talk forever. Education. But one of the next big topics is education. I feel like we've both gone through that first bachelor's degree, and like we were talking about student loans earlier in the episode, and you're going to your master's. What do you feel like about free college and student debt?
I think first of all, when it comes to education, I feel it should be federally governed and then each province can implement it. But I do believe education, at least K to 12, should be federally governed. Like I understand, let's say for Saskatchewan, there might be certain topics that you want your people to know, and then Ontario and all of that. I understand that piece, but me being someone from abroad that came here to study my university degree, I saw the discrepancy from my friends that had studied, let's say, in Alberta, compared to my friends that study high school in Saskatchewan, compared to people in Ontario that some had gone into the public school system, and some of them have done the private school system. And when it comes to public schooling, I think there should not be that level of discrepancy within the provinces, because that's where you start putting people in a disadvantage. Because once they step up and they want to go to college, some people will be better prepared just because of how their curriculum is like put together in their province, and that's not their fault. That's the fault of like what the province is putting into the educational system. uh, so I think if overall everyone in Canada, that like kind of like how the thing is like from C to C to C, everyone should be receiving the same level of education. Because as recent as like we talk about the discovery of corpse and bodies on residential school system with certain people, their education, and they accept it and they acknowledge it. They're like, we didn't learn that much about residential schools once we were already when we were in school. Whereas others, depending, let's say, where they were being raised, they might have gotten a little bit more of residential school information and knowledge because that was something that was implemented towards that. But I think if it was federally mandated and federally the curriculum was established, then across the provinces, everyone should learn about residential schools. No matter where you are in the province, no matter if you want to hide it or not, you'll have to teach it. So that's the first one. When it comes to college, when we compare ourselves to the States, I think we're a good place where our student debt is not that crazy. I do believe, coming from a country in which some of our best universities are public, you do have to still pay some fees, but they're very minimum. So that guarantees everyone access to college. I think right now, realistically, changing it from one place to another might be hard, but I think slowly it can be transitioned into a system in which college is more probably it's very hard to get to a place that it will be completely free, but I think we can reach a point in which it's more affordable and it doesn't create that much burden to the generation coming out of it. So I think there's ways I would like us to work towards a way in which college is more affordable in a way. And if by making that we are able to reach the ultimate goal of college being free in a way, then that's amazing. But as long as we can make it more affordable for different people, I think sometimes money, unfortunately, does sometimes limit where people can do for their future in that way. And when it comes to student debt, I think at that point, when you go out and you start working on everything, depending on what field you're working and all of that, there should be different programs on how to repay your student loan, and as well as sometimes forgiving student loans and things like that. And you know what? Sometimes and this is just me talking the top of my head, but sometimes there's certain degrees that you will be able to pay your student loan by doing that, by giving your service to the community. It's just in a certain way you're still paying forward that in a way compared to having to just pay it all off. But I think there's different ways to work about it. But I do agree, one, it could be more affordable. Two, the K-12 system needs to be federally implemented. But just like with minimum wage, there's a minimum that everyone in Canada should know. And then, if you want to go to private system, then you're enhancing yourself a little bit more with more knowledge and all of that. But then it puts everyone more on an advantage rather than going straight into from high school to university, putting students in a disadvantage just because you happen to be raised in Saskatchewan and you wanted to go to Alberta for university, but then for some reason, because of the curriculum that you're based in, your struggles are way more. You have more struggles going into a different province because you just didn't receive the adequate education. That's not on you. It's on the government that provided you with that curriculum.
Yep. So for me, I think the topic of education, free college, student debt. I think schooling should be cheap because education is where obviously not everyone uses their calculus 2 class in their everyday life when they graduate and work, but you do learn lots in the university, whether it's the social aspect or the managing your time and money, or just learning the actual technical skills that you use at your work. And I think having, lower tuition helps a lot of students afford that. Like there's so many people around the world, even in Canada, US, that can't afford to go to school. Of course, this ties back to the whole, universal basic income or minimum wage. But I think school should be free is hard to do, especially when you live in a, country with 30 million people, or you look at the US, 350 million people. It is hard to make it free, but I think it should be a lot lower than it is now. And, we often look at the countries such as in Scandinavia, so like Norway, Finland, Sweden, or like the rest of EU with Germany, France, Denmark, where school is almost free, right? Like, especially when I say school, I mean like university and colleges. It's a lot lower than here. It's a lot lower than US, and some parts it's pretty much free for even international students. It's free. And but that's the thing. Like, of course, we say Canada, US has a lot of people, but like, it's not like they have nothing at all, right? Like Finland has a population of 5 million, Denmark's 5 million, Norway's 5 million, Germany 83 million. So it's like it is doable, but I feel like it does lead to higher cost of living, which is true even in Norway, Finland, Sweden, where tuition is a lot lower, but it does come at the expense of the cost of living and taxes being a lot higher, which, personally I'm okay with if it helps society and if it helps me. If I didn't have student loans to pay off, I'd be in so much better position right now. I'd be able to afford housing, not housing, I mean like a house. I'd be able to afford a house, or like, a pretty nice car, like, because for a lot of us, tuition, in Canada, the average I think is like around 4,000 to 8,000 for any program for a 4-year degree per year. So over 4 years, even taking my example, just for tuition alone, I think it was like around 32,000. On top of that, if you want to go to a university where it's not your hometown, you have to pay for residences that double, triples your expenses, because residence is not cheap; it's expensive. Especially first couple of years, because you do want to live on like dorms or on campus to meet new people, make new friends. It does add up. So I feel like, having a less tuition to pay would help out so much. And even after you graduate, like so many people fail to find work after they graduate. There is a pause on your repayment plans for the government loans, but if you take a line of credit, or you're struggling to find work, it is hard to pay that off. So having that is always at the front of your mind, hoping you pay them off, you don't have to pay interest on it, too much interest. So I think having those lower tuitions would help a lot. And on top of that, for people that have already gone to university, I think canceling student debt, that's a big topic. I feel like Jagmeet Singh always brings it up in his election promises. That's one of his like key driving things. But even in the US, people are wanting to cancel student debt. I think that's a really good idea, because again, similar to minimum wage, tuition, university tuition back in the days like cost nothing compared to what it is now.
Yeah.
And, it's like it's those boomers that are complaining, saying, "Oh, why don't you just work and pay off your student debt?" But it's like, imagine where they would have been if they didn't have to pay off their student loans, which for, comparing to now, it's nothing, right? They would be so much better off. And you hear those stories about, people from back in the day being able to go to school while also having a family, while also being able to afford a house and a car and all this other expenses. It's like, we at this point, like in our like timeline in 2021, I don't think any of us can do that unless you come from a very, very privileged family and you have everything paid for. I definitely, even now, like paying for houses in Canada, it's so expensive. Like it is insane how high the house prices are.
Yeah.
Even in Saskatchewan, where we think it's a middle of nowhere, but the housing prices here is like so much more than it should be. Like housing prices, there's so much. So having, like for me, if I didn't have student debt when I graduated, honestly, I would be able to afford a house right now, or like a really nice car. Like obviously you don't need like a super fancy Lamborghini or like, Aston Martin, but like having a really nice reliable car or like a house, it'd be really nice. So I think, if there's a way to cancel all student debt, by all means. And that's the thing. A lot of people will be like, oh, how come I had to pay it off? But like it's a thing, like, other people are in more need than you. If you paid it off, that's amazing. Like, and I think that's one of the things about living in Saskatchewan, having that graduate retention program, which you get paid, $2,000 every year for 4 years, and then 3,000 for the next, or 4,000 for the next 3 years. It helps a lot because you get those tax credits back, and it honestly is a really great incentive. And even if you can't outright cancel student debt, I think having those incentives to stay in your home state, home province, home country, even, I think that helps quite a lot.
Yep. Well, I'm gonna forego my grad retention program because I'm moving. So
yep. I same here. I've got my GRP until now, but now that I'm moving, I won't be eligible for it anymore, and it's kind of sad. But
I know. Yeah, it is very sad.
I feel like, Ontario, BC, where cost of living is higher than Saskatchewan, those provinces should definitely have that. But we'll see. They have other concerns at the moment, I guess.
Yes.
All right. I know we're getting long, but I promise I have one last topic for us for this episode. Healthcare. And of course, we can, stop the episode without talking about healthcare, pharmacare, and dental care. What are your thoughts on that, Andreas?
I think everyone should have access to it at the end of the day.
Period.
Period. That's it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think health is a human right and should be able to be healthy. And health shouldn't be a burden to people just because, let's say, if you have a health system in which you're doing everything in order to prevent illnesses and all of that, then one, you're driving life expectancy higher. So then your workforce can go a little later on. Even like if you retire, there are certain people that still want to keep on working because they still have the energy for that. So if you have a good health system, then you're able to have more people in the workforce for a longer period of time in a certain way. So there's that. The healthier people are, the better it is for to carry on, and the less burden it is going to be on that. And then when it comes to pharmacare and dental care, I mean, if you do have a disease, but then you have to afford medicine for it, well, thanks, doctor. Thanks for letting me know what I have, but I'm not able to cover my meds. Then what was the point of going to the doctor if you're not going to be able to afford the medication for it? It's like you only get half the job done. And then, and the worst part sometimes is just like people might actually start facing other diseases, other conditions because of that initial diagnostic. But at the same time, it's not only about the physical health, but also working and being super passionate about it. It's also about the mental health about it. What about like you get this horrible diagnosis, right? But then you figure out that you cannot cover the meds, but now you have to live with this diagnosis. The mental burden that creates to a person, the defeat that it creates for that, is worse because then they either will not have the energy to go to work, or they just feel like, well, my life is done at this point. So I think like if we're gonna help, we're gonna like help the entire way. And then with dental care, I mean, oral health, it is part of health. So the part that it's separated, it is just like, okay, we're gonna take care of your entire body systems except for your mouth, where it is where you are ingesting food, and when it is one of the areas of our body that is constantly being exposed to so many different factors. We're not gonna take care of that. It's just also kind of like a little, in my mind, a little bit like ironic. The mouth, which in a certain way, when you look at it biologically, it is where we are ingesting our energy sources from. It's not covered, which is a little bit wild. But then, yeah, no, I feel everyone should be covered. Everything we should be working towards a system in which all of those are covered for the population. And then, I mean, personally, I don't have anything against private industry when it comes to the health sector. if you can afford private sector, or you can afford a different insurance that can pay for a private sector, that's on you as an individual where you choose to invest more money into. But as a taxpayer, you have the right to like go through a regular, like through the healthcare system and be attended that way, you know. But if you want to pay more to go private, that's on you, you know. If you choose to pay more, that's on you. You choose to do that, but everyone should have access to doctors. Everyone should have access to professionals, and that's just those are my 2 cents on that.
Yep, I'm the same way on you on with that. I think, I mean, there's a reason we started this podcast is because so many things align. For healthcare, dental care, pharmacare, I feel like there should be a universal, Medicare for all, which in Canada we're privileged to have. For healthcare, anyway,
Yeah.
dental care not so much right now, but I hope it does move that way because a lot of political discussions really do tie into each other, and I feel like healthcare, if you're not well enough, you can't work, you can't make money. You don't have that freedom, economic freedom. You don't have that social freedom. I feel like so healthcare is one of the basic, I want to say, like, it's a basic right. It is definitely a basic right, and it's not just a privilege. It's because, like, if you can't, like, if if you have even something simple as a flu, the flu can knock out a lot of people. It can kill a lot of people. But modern technology has brought us so much that vaccines help so much, and even with a lot of other diseases that back in the day would have like killed someone right away. Nowadays you can go to a doctor, you can get treated up, and you're back to work the next week. Or like even like like if you need to get an amputation done, like so many like those how do you say it, prosthetics, they help people so much. And so like healthcare, Medicare, pharmacare, dental care, like I said, it is a basic human right. If you're not feeling well, you have the right to feel better. And if you don't feel better, if you can't get better, obviously that's a different conversation. But modern medicine helps so much, and like you said, going to the doctor is just half the equation because you still need the medicine to help you feel better. And it should definitely be I do believe in the universal healthcare. It's a really good thing we have in Canada. And of course there is like even with doctors, for example, there's Canada has a universal healthcare where doctors getting paid all fair share. But then in the US, they have more of the private clinics, private practices where they get paid way more. And all these Canadian doctors do go down to the US because they get paid more. So I think that's a struggle of you having universal healthcare versus other places having private healthcares, and even in Canada, if there private practices more prevalent, I feel like the universal healthcare would suffer a little bit. But at the end of the day, for basic things, for people that aren't well off, that aren't privileged enough to go to private care, I feel like that's where the universal healthcare, for all shines through. Because same thing as universal basic income, if you can't afford to do those more luxurious things, the basic things should be an option, right? So like if I was struggling, I wouldn't go to like the most expensive doctor out there. I just want a doctor to help me with my basic needs. And the quality of the care might be a little different, but the education that the doctors go through, whether they're in private care or universal, healthcare, it's the same. They all have to go through the university degree. They all have to get that medical doctor degree. They all have to do those rotations. So I feel like at the end of the day, it's suited to your needs and your what's it called, like what your economic and social conditions are at that time. And I'm all for it. Let's open up healthcare for everyone. In Canada, like I said, we're privileged enough to have it, but in the US, I feel like they would do even better because there's so many people that can't afford basic tests because it's so expensive, right? Like you go to the hospital to have a baby, it costs so much. You go to the doctor for a routine checkup, it costs so much. Like and people avoid going to the doctors just because they can't afford it. Or same with insurance. Like insurance in Canada, I would say, is pretty cheap compared to some of the other places.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, right? Like and I like that's how I said it. If you want to spend more money in different in different things. That's on you and where you choose to spend your money. But everyone should be able to access it.
Absolutely. Well, Andres, that was, this is definitely one of our longer episodes, but I'm glad like we talked about it. We could definitely talk forever, but we
Yes.
won't. We won't talk forever. We'll keep it for future episodes. But so for this episode, it was a longer one, so I'll just recap for the listeners. First, we talked about just politics in general, the different sides of politics, the U.S., American politics. And then we moved on to the more specific conversations. We talked about our personal stances on criminal justice, gun control, economic inequality, education, and then healthcare. And I think those are some of the most basic, political topics we could talk about. Of course, there's so much more, such as immigration, climate change, foreign policy, and changes to the current voting system. But there's just so much to talk about, and of course we can't get to them all. But I'm so glad we talked about the 5 major ones today.
Yes.
I know a lot of people are like saying education isn't major, but I think education is one of the most forefront of life, because that's where you learn things. If you don't have education, even the word education itself, you don't have to go to university to learn. You can go to a polytechnic school, you can go to a community college, you can learn online. Like, education is definitely one of the basic things that we all learn in life.
Exactly. I think, yeah, you said it right.
So I will wrap up there, with really good conversation. If you guys have any personal stances, opinions, beliefs, send it our way. We'll include it. We'll talk about it. I know a lot of my friends that are listening are I know a lot of people these days are saying they're liberal, but they're fiscally conservative, which I disagree with heavily. I don't want to, bring that up right now, but that is, you're welcome. Even though I disagree with it, if Andres disagrees with it, we're allowed to disagree, but that's where the discussion, comes up. That's where we can sit down and have civil conversations about, our opinions, your opinions, and, just let it all loose.
Exactly.
All right, Andres, what are you looking forward to this week, buddy?
What am I looking forward for this week? I am looking forward to, even though it's a hectic week because gotta finish packing and finish like logistical things here and there. I am looking forward to seeing my friends. I'm looking forward for the different evening plans that I have. Literally, I think I right now I only have Tuesday off, I think. Oh no, I think I have Wednesday off. Every other evening has something. So we'll see if I survive. But I'm excited just to, you know, just to start wrapping things up, even though it's a little bit sad. I'm very excited to be able to spend some time. And we're releasing this on Monday, but as of yesterday, our restrictions are off. Just knowing that restrictions are a little bit off, it's great because we're heading in the right direction.
Absolutely. And I know, listeners probably get confused because we time travel all the time, because we usually record on Fridays or Saturdays, but then our episode comes on Monday. So, I'm going to time travel. I know you're excited for the restrictions to be loosened, but I'm still back in Saturday mode. There's lots of, like in the sports world, there's lots of things to look forward to this weekend. First of all, like, I'm not a big UFC fan, but, anytime Conor McGregor fights, you got to watch him. He's a very polarizing character, and watching him fight is pretty cool. Like, I'm not a big UFC or MMA guy, but you gotta watch that. Besides that, the Copa America is happening on tonight as well, Argentina versus Brazil. I really want Argentina to win. I want Messi to win a major tournament before he retires in the next couple of years, so looking forward to watching that. The next thing is the European Championship. So the Euros finally is coming to an end. Sadly, my Belgium, they choked and they lost to Italy. So they're not in the finals, but it is going to be Italy versus England. And I feel like, it's pretty much England versus the rest of the world, because a lot of the world doesn't want to see England win. And I'm perfectly okay with that. How they won last game, it was sort of controversial. They were the better team, but it was a controversial penalty that, allowed them
Yeah.
to win in extra times. Not too happy about that, but it is what it is. So go Italy. And then tennis, I think Novak Djokovic is in the finals. He's playing another Italian. So lots of Italy pride this weekend. But I think, and like I said, I'm not a huge tennis fan. I do like playing tennis. But anytime, one of the big athletes play, whether it's Serena Williams, Djokovic, you have to definitely watch them. So I'll be watching that as well. And I think that's it in the sports world. So looking forward to all of those, watching sports back to back and just enjoying this great weather we're having.
Yeah.
All right. Listeners, thanks for listening to an extra long episode for this week. It was an honor and privilege, to be able to talk to Andres and just express our opinions on political stances. When I feel like a lot of people already know me, but it was really good to just talk things through, hearing Andres and his opinions, and we look forward to doing more of these in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. We always appreciate it. And then we'll keep in touch with all of you through our Instagram and our Twitter at the 2 Average Brown Bros. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. You know where to reach out. But thanks again. We appreciate everyone who listens to us. But other than that, we'll catch everyone next Monday.
Absolutely. And if you want to connect with us, as always, you can connect to us through the Instagram. Our handle is 2 Average Brown Bros. Reach out to us if you have any comments, concerns, questions, crybaby stuff. Reach out to us. Let us know what your thoughts are, what you're feeling, what you're eating, what you're doing. Anything, let us know. And we'll get back to you on the next episode.
Exactly. But other than that, we'll catch you next Monday. Bye.
See ya.